It was a brisk Halloween evening, and the air was filled with the smell of falling leaves and impending frost. I had spent the day meticulously planning how I would decorate our home for the occasion. My boyfriend, Alex, had promised to help, but as the hours dragged on, I received a text from him saying he'd be working late. Disappointment settled in my stomach like a stone. Still, I couldn't let the day pass without some semblance of festivity. I decided to go to the local store to grab a few last-minute decorations, some fake cobwebs, a couple of carved pumpkins, maybe even a battery-operated candle or two to create that perfect spooky ambience. As I stepped outside, the sun was dipping below the horizon, casting long shadows across the yard. I shivered involuntarily. Something about the night felt off. Shaking the feeling away, I locked the door behind me and headed to my car, the crunch of leaves underfoot breaking the stillness of the evening. The store was only a short drive away, but the roads felt eerily empty. I turned on the radio, hoping some music would lighten my mood, but the static seemed to echo the unsettling silence surrounding me. As I pulled into the parking lot, I noticed an old man sitting on a bench outside the store. He wore a tattered coat, his face obscured by the shadows of his wide-brimmed hat. He seemed to be watching me. I parked my car and gathered my courage before stepping out. As I walked past him, he raised his head slightly, revealing eyes that glimmered with an unsettling intensity. "Be careful tonight, dear," he warned, his voice low and raspy. "The shadows come alive on Halloween." I chuckled nervously, brushing it off as some quirky Halloween banter. "Thanks. I'll keep that in mind." I hurried into the store, the bell above the door jingling as I entered. Inside, I was greeted by the familiar sights and sounds of Halloween. The shelves were stocked with decorations, and children darted around in their costumes, filling the air with laughter. I picked out what I needed, trying to focus on the task at hand. As I headed to the checkout, I couldn't shake the old man's warning from my mind. After paying, I stepped back outside. The night had deepened, and a thick fog began to roll in, curling around the trees and enveloping the parking lot. I shivered again, glancing at the old man. He was still there, but now he seemed to be gazing into the fog, as if waiting for something or someone. I hurried to my car, fumbling with the keys in my pocket as the fog thickened around me. Just as I unlocked the door, I heard a rustling noise behind me. My heart raced as I turned around, but the old man had vanished, leaving only a heavy silence in his wake. A shiver ran down my spine. I climbed into my car and locked the doors, feeling a sense of relief wash over me. But as I drove home, the feeling of being watched crept back in. I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone lurking behind me, but there was nothing, just the fog swallowing the road. When I finally turned onto my street, a sense of normalcy returned. The houses were decorated with jack-o'-lanterns, ghosts, and cobwebs. But as I parked in front of my home, a gnawing anxiety settled back in. The air felt thick, and the shadows around my house seemed to stretch and shift unnaturally. I shook my head, trying to dispel the strange thoughts. Grabbing the bags of decorations, I made my way to the front door. Just as I reached for the handle, I noticed something strange. The door was slightly ajar. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. Had I forgotten to lock it? I pushed the door open slowly, calling out, "Alex? Are you home?" Silence answered. The air was thick and heavy, like a blanket pressing down on me. I stepped inside, the shadows inside the house seeming to pulse and shift. I called again, my voice barely above a whisper. "Alex!" Still nothing. I set the decorations down and moved toward the living room, each step echoing ominously. The faint glow of the streetlights outside cast eerie shapes on the walls. Suddenly, I heard a soft thud coming from the basement. My blood ran cold. I hesitated, debating whether to investigate or run back to the safety of my car. But curiosity and fear compelled me forward. I descended the creaky stairs, the darkness swallowing me whole. The basement was dimly lit, with only a flickering bulb swinging above. As I reached the bottom, I could see the shadows moving in the corners of my vision, and I felt the oppressive weight of dread settle over me. "Alex!" I called again, my voice trembling. Then, from the corner of my eye, I saw something dart past, a flash of movement. I whipped around, but there was nothing there. Just the chill of the damp air and the unsettling feeling of being watched. Just then, I heard a soft, childlike giggle echoing through the basement. My heart raced as I turned, the sound filling me with a sense of dread. "Who's there?" I demanded, my voice shaking. Silence hung heavily in the air, thick as the fog outside. I backed up, feeling the wall behind me, wanting nothing more than to escape this suffocating darkness. I turned to flee up the stairs, but before I could reach the first step, a sudden chill swept through the room. "Help me!" The whisper was faint, a soft plea that sent my heart into a frenzy. I froze, fear coursing through me. "Who are you?" I gasped, my throat dry. Just then, I heard the sound of footsteps above me, the creaking of floorboards. "Alex!" I shouted, desperate for a familiar voice. The footsteps stopped. I darted back up the stairs, my heart pounding in my ears. I slammed the basement door shut and locked it, breathing heavily as I leaned against it. I felt like I was losing my mind, but I wasn't alone. A soft thud sounded behind the door, followed by a low chuckle. "Help me!" I stumbled back, fear gripping me as I scrambled for my phone, fingers shaking as I dialed Alex's number. It rang and rang, but he didn't pick up. Just as I was about to try again, the lights flickered, plunging me into darkness. Panic surged through me. I fumbled for the light switch, but it didn't respond. The house was alive with whispers now, echoing all around me, melding into one voice that echoed in my mind. "Help me!" I dashed for the front door, but it wouldn't budge. I pulled with all my might, fear wrapping around me like a vice. "Alex!" I screamed, but the words felt hollow, swallowed by the night. Suddenly, the front door swung open, revealing Alex standing there, his face pale and drawn. "What's wrong?" he asked, worry etched on his features. I stumbled toward him, relief flooding my system, but as I glanced back over my shoulder, I caught a glimpse of something dark in the shadows. "Did you hear that?" I whispered, panic clawing at my throat. "Hear what?" he asked, stepping inside and closing the door behind him. "Something in the basement. A voice." Alex frowned, glancing toward the closed door. "You must have imagined it. You've been under a lot of stress, decorating and all." But as he spoke, the whispers grew louder, swirling around us like a sinister breeze. "Help me!" The old man's words echoed in my mind, intertwining with the chilling whispers. What had I invited into my home? As I stood there, frozen in fear, I realized that the shadows weren't just outside. They were inside, too. The weight of the unknown pressed heavily upon me, leaving a haunting question in its wake. Would the terror of Halloween ever truly end? I had always loved Halloween. The air would crisp with autumn's breath, the leaves would crackle underfoot, and the smell of wood smoke lingered in the evening air. This year, though, I felt a gnawing anxiety lurking beneath the festive veneer. Maybe it was the news reports of strange happenings in the neighborhood, or perhaps it was just the stillness of the night as I settled into my living room, ready to hand out candy to the trick-or-treaters. The clock struck 6, and I positioned myself by the window, a bowl of candy in my lap. I imagined the kids in their costumes, laughing and shouting as they ran from house to house. My neighborhood was always bustling with energy on Halloween night, and I had prepared my candy stash accordingly. It had been a long time since I had seen such joy in the faces of children, and I was excited to be part of it. As darkness descended, the first trick-or-treaters arrived, giggling in their costumes, little ghosts and goblins knocking on my door. I greeted them with a smile, handing out candy while listening to their playful banter. A witch, a superhero, and a vampire quickly filled my doorstep, their eyes bright with excitement as they emptied my bowl. I couldn't help but chuckle as they hurried away, racing each other to the next house. As the night wore on, the trickle of children slowed to a halt. By 9, I was left with an empty bowl and a silence that felt almost heavy. I leaned back into the couch, the flickering of the TV casting ghostly shadows in the dim light of the room. The warm glow from the lamp in the corner was the only comfort in the encroaching darkness. Then, a knock at the door. It was a strange sound, more like a thud than a knock. I glanced at the clock. It was nearly 10. I wasn't expecting anyone, least of all a visitor at this hour. My heart raced slightly, the thrill of unexpected company mingling with an odd sense of dread. I rose cautiously, my feet making soft pads against the hardwood floor. Peering through the peephole, I saw a man standing on my porch. He was tall and gaunt, dressed in tattered clothes that seemed to hang off his frame as if they belonged to another era. His face was obscured by shadows, but I could see his eyes, dark and hollow like bottomless pits. "Trick or treat," he called, his voice a strange mix of cheerfulness and something darker. My stomach churned. Something felt off. I hesitated, my mind racing with questions. What was this man doing here? Where were the children? I think we're all out of candy," I called back, trying to keep my tone light, hoping he'd take the hint and leave. Instead, he stepped closer, leaning into the light just enough for me to catch a glimpse of his face. His skin was pale, almost ghostly, and his lips curled into a smile that sent a chill down my spine. "I don't want candy," he said softly, his voice low and melodic. "I'm here for something else." I stepped back from the door, heart pounding in my chest. "What do you mean?" "I think you should go. It's late." But he just smiled wider, revealing teeth that looked sharp and jagged. "You're not afraid of the dark, are you?" A chill crept up my spine as I grasped the doorknob tightly, unwilling to let him in but terrified to provoke him. I could hear the rustling of leaves outside, the wind picking up, and for a moment, I considered calling the police. Just as I was about to, the man stepped back, raising his hands in mock surrender. "Relax," he said, still smiling. "I'm just looking for a friend. I thought he might be here." Before I could reply, he turned and started walking down the porch steps, his movements unnaturally smooth. I watched, my heart still racing, unsure if he was actually leaving or simply biding his time. Suddenly, he stopped and turned back, locking eyes with me through the glass. "You should watch your back tonight," he said, his voice dripping with an unsettling sincerity. Then he was gone, swallowed by the shadows of the night. I stood frozen for a moment, trying to process what had just happened. Should I call the police? I grabbed my phone and dialed, my hands trembling slightly as I recounted the bizarre encounter. The operator assured me that an officer would be dispatched to my location. "Just stay inside and lock your doors," she said. As I ended the call, the silence of the house enveloped me again. I turned off the porch light and secured the locks, peering through the window into the darkness beyond. My mind raced with questions about that strange man. Who was he? What did he want? Minutes felt like hours, and my anxiety only grew. I glanced at the clock. It was nearly 11. Just as I was about to pull the curtains shut, I saw the headlights of a police car pull up outside. Relief flooded through me, but my heart sank as I opened the door to let them in. "Where is he?" I asked, a tremor in my voice. "The man who was just here?" The officers exchanged glances, one of them stepping into the yard to look around. "What man?" one of them asked. "The one in tattered clothes. He knocked just a few minutes ago. He said he was looking for someone." The officer furrowed his brow, shaking his head. "We didn't see anyone on our way here. Are you sure he didn't just leave?" "But I saw him. He was right here." I gestured wildly, feeling the panic rising within me. They searched the yard, calling out, but there was no sign of the man, just the whispering wind and the rustle of leaves. "We'll keep an eye out," one officer said, giving me a reassuring pat on the shoulder, but his tone was distant. They left, leaving me alone with the silence that now felt even heavier. As the door clicked shut, I glanced outside one last time, half expecting to see that gaunt figure lurking in the shadows. But the street was empty, cloaked in darkness, the night swallowing all evidence of his presence. The air was thick with an unsettling tension, and as I retreated to the safety of my home, I couldn't shake the feeling that Halloween had unleashed something I wasn't prepared to confront. The man was gone, but his warning lingered in my mind, a chilling reminder that some things that go bump in the night are not meant to be ignored. Halloween was never my thing. I was 15, and the days of running door to door in a costume felt long gone. But my younger brother, Sam, was only 8, and he lived for Halloween. He'd spent weeks planning his costume, a classic vampire with a cape, slicked back hair, and fake fangs. My parents asked me to take him trick-or-treating, and I couldn't say no. The things you do for family, I figured. The night was dark and chilly, perfect Halloween weather, and Sam was buzzing with excitement as we left the house. Our neighborhood was alive with kids running around in every costume imaginable, from witches and superheroes to ghosts and zombies. We made our rounds, moving from house to house as Sam's candy bag grew heavier. After about an hour, Sam spotted his friend Billy from school, dressed as a werewolf. Billy's dad was tagging along, keeping a watchful eye as the two boys started comparing their candy hauls, trading mini chocolate bars and lollipops as we walked. At one point, Billy's dad offered to take both boys for the rest of the night, inviting Sam to stay over for a sleepover. "Please," Sam begged, looking up at me with wide eyes. I hesitated, glancing between Sam and Billy's dad. Something about the night was unsettling me. I couldn't put my finger on it, but I wanted to get home. Still, Sam looked so hopeful, and Billy's dad seemed trustworthy enough. "Fine," I relented, "but make sure you call Mom and let her know, okay?" He gave me a toothy grin and scampered off with Billy, the two of them already swapping pieces of candy as they disappeared into the crowd. Now alone, I decided to head back. The streets had thinned out a little as the night wore on. Only a few kids were still trick-or-treating, their voices echoing eerily in the quiet. The festive excitement had dulled, and a stillness settled over the neighborhood, broken only by the occasional distant laughter or a stray shout. I pulled my jacket tighter against the night's chill, feeling a creeping unease. As I turned a corner, I noticed a man a few houses down. He was tall, dressed in a charcoal suit that seemed oddly out of place among the Halloween costumes. He stood on the sidewalk, facing a house, but he wasn't moving, just staring up at a lit window on the second floor. I slowed my pace, curiosity mingling with a sense of dread. Who wears a suit on Halloween night? He didn't have a costume, no candy bag, and he wasn't with any kids. Just standing there. As I passed, I couldn't help but glance over, trying not to be obvious. His head turned ever so slightly, and for a brief moment, our eyes met. There was something wrong with his face. His skin looked waxy and pale, and his eyes were dark, almost hollow, as if they absorbed the light rather than reflected it. A chill shot through me, and I quickly looked away, walking faster. I told myself it was just some guy trying to scare the neighborhood kids, a cheap Halloween trick, but that didn't explain the prickling fear creeping up my spine. I checked over my shoulder, hoping he'd moved on, but he hadn't. He was still there, standing in the exact same spot, only now he was looking at me. I turned back around, trying to act casual, trying to keep my breathing steady. I kept my eyes fixed forward, not daring to look back again, even as the hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. Every instinct was screaming at me to run, but I couldn't shake the feeling that running would somehow make things worse. The silence of the street became oppressive, and each step felt heavier than the last. The houses around me seemed to stretch and warp, their decorations twisting in the shadows, casting strange shapes that seemed to shift in the corners of my eyes. I quickened my pace, each step echoing in the stillness. A few houses down, I couldn't resist. I glanced over my shoulder again. He was there, closer this time, just a few houses behind me, his figure dark against the dim streetlights. He wasn't walking, but somehow he had closed the distance between us. My heart pounded, and my legs started to shake. I swallowed hard, facing forward again, forcing myself to stay calm. I could see my house now just a few blocks away. I just had to make it home, lock the doors, and shake off this insane fear. But then I heard it, a soft, shuffling sound, just a few feet behind me. I was almost running now, my breaths coming in short gasps as I closed the last stretch to my house. I fumbled with my keys, hands trembling, finally unlocking the door and slipping inside. I shut it behind me, locking it with shaky fingers, my heart racing so loud I could hear it. I leaned against the door, letting out a shaky breath, trying to calm down. I probably just freaked myself out. Halloween, right? People were bound to dress up, act creepy. It's all part of the night. But as I turned to head upstairs, something in the window caught my eye. There he was, standing on the sidewalk, right outside my house. He was looking directly at me, that same hollow gaze, as if he could see through the glass, through the walls, into the very depths of my mind. I froze, a wave of cold terror washing over me. His lips moved, forming words that I couldn't hear, but somehow I felt like I understood. He was calling me, beckoning. I backed away from the window, heart racing. I didn't want to look, didn't want to see him, but something inside compelled me to glance again. He was closer now, standing at the end of the driveway, his face shadowed but his eyes still visible, dark and unfathomable. It was as if he was waiting for something, as if he had all the time in the world. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and I jumped, pulling it out with shaking hands. It was a text from Sam's number. "Where are you?" I frowned, typing back quickly. "I'm at home. Are you okay?" There was no response. I could feel my heart pounding faster as I typed again, "Sam," but nothing came through. And then a second text appeared on my screen, but it wasn't from Sam. It was from an unknown number with just 2 words, "Look outside." My stomach dropped. I didn't want to look, didn't want to see if he was still there, but I couldn't stop myself. I took a step toward the window, then another, until I could see outside. The man was standing on my porch, his face mere inches from the glass. I stumbled back, my hand covering my mouth to keep from screaming. His mouth was moving again, forming silent words that I couldn't understand. His hands slowly rising to the glass, fingers pressed against the window. And then, just as suddenly as he had appeared, he was gone. I didn't sleep that night, and when the morning came, I tried to convince myself that it was just a Halloween prank, a trick of the mind. But something told me that I hadn't seen the last of him. Days passed, and I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, even in the safety of daylight. I'd catch glimpses of him in crowded places, a flash of a dark suit in the corner of my vision, but every time I looked, he was gone. Halloween came and went, but the man never left my mind. Even now, years later, every Halloween night, I find myself looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see him there, watching, waiting. And sometimes, in the dead of night, I still get those messages. Look outside. Every year, I try not to, but the fear remains, the question gnawing at me. Would he ever really leave, or was he just waiting for the right time to return?